Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mind Tea, a podcast where we discuss sip-sized, practical tools for meaningful living. I'm your host, Izzy Wan, a mindfulness teacher, tea ceremony host, hypnotherapist, and speaker. In today's episode, we're going to talk about stress, particularly how to manage stress. We all go through periods of stress in our own lives, and if you're listening to this now, you are most likely dealing with some form of stress yourself as well. Stress can often make us feel like we're doing something wrong or not coping correctly, and it can be a really debilitating thing to be dealing with, especially if you don't know how to manage it. But stress is definitely not a sign that you're doing life wrong. It's an inevitable part of everyone's life at some point or another. And whilst we can't get rid of it completely, we can definitely learn ways to manage it so that it does not take over us completely. So we're going to dive deep today with a bit of neuroscience as well. This is probably my most informative episode to date, so feel free to grab a notebook. By the end of this episode, you will understand what stress really is, the different types of stress we encounter, and then practical tools to deal with stress in the short, medium, and long term. If you haven't already, I would actually recommend you to start with the previous episode on how to feel your emotions first, because our lack of ability to deal with our emotions leads to the activation of our stress response. And once you have gained an understanding, you can then look at the tools to release any emotions that still feel present or stuck in the body, even after we have gone through the process of feeling them. Let's get into it. When it comes to managing stress, it's really important to first understand what is happening to us so we can process what's going on biologically, which helps us to be less fearful of it and work with it. Stress is a natural human response that occurs when challenges, known as stressors, come up for us. In the presence of stresses, our body produces physical, mental, and behavioral responses to adapt to these challenges, which is what we call stress. When your body feels that something is challenging, your brain activates its own inbuilt alarm system, the amygdala. The amygdala is a part of us that is constantly scanning for danger so that it can ensure our own survival. Think of it as this security camera. You know, when you walk into a supermarket and you see these security cameras constantly following you everywhere, and that's what our amygdala is like. It's constantly scanning for threats. When there is some sort of change present, this security camera zooms in and it goes red, or in scientific terms, the amygdala sounds its alarm to the hypothalamus, our brain's control center, which then communicates with the rest of the body through the nervous system so that we are able to fight or flee. That is why when we feel stressed, you will notice certain physiological changes in your own body. Because the hypothalamus is communicating with different functions of our body, activating our sympathetic nervous system, what we call the fight or flight mode, which releases our adrenaline, increases our heart rate and our blood pressure, and then downregulating the parasympathetic nervous system, what we call the rest and digest mode, which promotes relaxation, sleep, and recovery. All of these things happen so quickly in a matter of milliseconds before your conscious mind even registers it. Like, have you ever noticed sometimes a person might say something or an unexpected situation might happen, which if you zoomed out of it, you'll notice that it's actually not that big of a deal. But in the moments, you all of a sudden notice that you're in this state of panic and you're hyperventilating before you even know it. I had it just the other day actually when someone told me some bad news, and it wasn't an existential threat. But somehow my vision started narrowing and my heart started beating so fast, and before I knew it, my breath was shallow, even though in the end, all the person said to me was, "I need to talk to you, Izzy." That's because our stress response is so efficient. All of these signals get sent before your brain's visual centers have even had a chance to process what's happening. And it does this so that if we need to jump out of a road before a car zooms past us, or maybe something's flying past our head and we need to duck our heads before we have time to think about it, we are able to do so. It's important to understand that stress is actually there to help us. It's so efficient in order to help us in the moments, not to harm us. It's there to protect us, not to punish us. And it's only when it is extended for too long of a period or too much frequency that it can harm us. So what does it look like when it's extended for too much frequency? Well, there's a whole set of physical sensations, emotions, and behaviors that can happen when you're feeling stress, and there's no one way for this to look. So how you might deal with stress might be completely different in someone else, and perhaps you've noticed that as well, that two people react very differently to the same situation. Some things physically that you might feel though are things like exhaustion, headaches, dizziness, teeth grinding. I do that quite often. I grind my teeth in my sleep. Clenching your fists, clenching your jaw, tightening your shoulders. You might notice chest pain, muscle tension, sexual dysfunction, a weakened immune system, or random aches and pains and digestive issues. Like for me, if I feel stressed, I find it really hard to eat, and my appetite is gone completely, and I start getting quite gassy or I get a lot of stomach pains. And some people may get hives even, which are these raised bumps and rashes that appear on your skin. So these are some of the symptoms you might get if you're feeling stressed, and this is how they manifest physically. Then you got emotionally. You may notice irritability, low moods, or you might find yourself spiraling down into worst case scenarios, have brain fog, or become more negative in general. And that's because your brain is simply prioritizing survival over reflection. You may get snappy, or you might isolate yourself from others. You may also doom scroll or spend excessively. There's a huge correlation between when I feel stressed and when my phone time increases. And what's crazy is that sometimes I don't even realize that I'm doing this. And I realize that it's all about escaping my feelings in the moment. Another thing that might happen for you is that you overwork or you overexercise to avoid everything, which has in the past been my go-to strategy because it's a very sneaky one. This one seems to disguise itself as a healthy coping mechanism, but what it does is actually help you to avoid and take you further away from dealing with the root cause of the issue. Or you might binge eat. So if you can relate to any of these are all behaviors that are coping strategies. They all link back to your body either being in fight, flight, or freeze mode. When you are able to spot these signs early, that's when you can step in gently and then choose a tool that helps you. Before you choose a tool that helps you, though, it's also important to know which type of stress you are dealing with so that you have the specific tools for each of them. When I first started speaking of the word stress, what immediately came to mind for you? Probably a couple of negative, uncomfortable feelings and thoughts, right? I mean, no one wakes up first thing in the morning being like, today I want to feel stressed. And we often talk about stress like it's the worst thing that should be avoided at all costs. But what if it's not about whether stress is only good or bad for you, but about what amount of stress is good for us? And also for how long? There are actually three types of stress based on duration and frequency. The first one is acute stress. Acute stress is an immediate reaction to something that is short term. So, in evolutionary terms, our ancestors needed stress. It gave us this quick boost of motivation for us to react quickly to different threats, leading to our survival. Acute stress is short and typically only lasts for a few minutes or a few days, and then it disappears when that stress passes. In the modern day, this can look like road rage or having an argument with someone who you disagree with. It feels very intense in the moment, right? And then the second one we have is episodic acute stress. This happens if you keep experiencing that acute stress without enough time for you to return to your baseline. Now, people with this type of stress might talk about their lives as feeling very chaotic, very overwhelming, or filled with a lot of responsibility. We all know someone like that, right? Who often seems to live quite a crazy life. So think of it as a cycle of repeated short-term events. For example, when we are juggling too many roles at once, or we are making too many unrealistic demands on ourselves at once. Now, the third one, and probably the most problematic of all of them, is chronic stress. So this is where you have persistent, ongoing pressure for an extended period of time that can lead to serious physical and mental consequences. It's usually a long-term pressure. For example, a very demanding job, a long-term illness, or maybe feeling stuck even in an unhappy long-term relationship and feeling like you don't have a way to get out. When you have chronic stress, you are in the state of fight or flight for too long, which drains your body's internal resources and weakens its immune system. So instead of stress being black or white, we can now start to see it as more on a continuum, and then we can look at the right tools to use to manage it. So let's talk about the tools now. I'm going to split this up into short term, medium term, and then long term tools so that you can really tailor it to each of the above types of stress that we have just talked about. Starting off with the short term tools. These are things that you want to do when you're dealing with acute stress, where you might feel an incredibly strong response to something, prompting you into survival mode. In these instances, if you feel overwhelmed in the moment, say like a 10 out of 10 on a subjective units of distress scale, then it's actually not as useful to use logic, what we call a top-down approach, to help you to calm down. And this is because of the reasons we said before on how stress works, where it pushes your adrenaline so high before your brain even has time to process or compute it. So what you want to do instead in these moments, you feel 10 out of 10, super overwhelmed, and almost like you can't think of anything in the moment, is to instead focus on the body, what we call a bottom-up approach, where you use your physical and sensory experience to help calm your nervous system. One of the easiest ways we can do that is through deep belly breaths, which is a tool that I often talk about in this podcast. Have you ever noticed that when you're stressed, your breath gets really shallow and you start hyperventilating? That's because we are often breathing in our chest, which constricts our ribcage, preventing the flow of oxygen in. The one thing you want to try instead is deep belly breaths, diaphragmatic breathing. It's where you place one hand on your chest and one hand on your lower abdomen, and you take a few deep belly breaths in with a longer exhale out. The idea is that you focus on making the hand on your belly expand while the hand on your chest stays still. Let's try it in real time together now to see if you notice a difference. So taking a deep belly breath in with a longer exhale out. Deep belly breath in, deliberately slowing down the breath, and a longer exhale out. And really staying with each breath now. Make it intentional, make it count, and really try and focus on the physical touch sensation of your hand rising. And when you feel comfortable with that, you can then place both hands on your lower belly and feel your abdomen rising like a balloon and staying with that for a few moments. Can you feel your fingertips expand and contract with each breath? Okay, coming back to the now, just notice, how do you feel now? So now that we've tried this in real time together, I'm going to explain why this works. It works in several ways. First of all, the deep breath in activates your relaxation response by increasing your oxygen intake, and then the longer exhale stimulates your vagus nerve, which in turn triggers your parasympathetic system, helping to slow down your heart rate. Second, when we are stressed in the moment, have you noticed that we often focus on too many thoughts and too many things at once? So we start panicking, and then in turn we start feeling overwhelmed. By focusing on only one thing at once, in this case, the sensation of your abdominal rising, you provide a distraction technique, interrupting that fight or flight response and then shifting you back to your baseline. And third, the deep belly breath actually has a physical grounding effect, which you might have noticed when you put your hands on your belly as well. The diaphragm moves downwards, allowing for more deeper and more efficient breaths compared to our chest breathing. And it also helps to create this physical feeling of being grounded, of being centered and safe in our core. There are many different types of breathing exercises out there. You don't have to just follow this one. But personally, through testing all of these myself during times of stress, I've consistently come back to the belly breath because I like how it distracts me with that physical sensation. And it's also a very simple, easy tool that you can access anywhere without needing to learn new breathing patterns, which is why I've put this under short-term strategy. You can try these belly breaths for 3 rounds, 3 full belly breaths, or 5, or however long you wish. You can even turn it into a meditation in itself. You could put a timer on for 1 or 2 minutes and just stay with your breath in those moments. Another short-term tool you can use is to soften your gaze. Have you noticed that when people or yourself are nervous or stressed, they tend to have very rigid movements around them? So maybe you're at a party and then you notice when someone's looking, their movements and actions are very rigid, right? Instead of looking around like this and your head and body following your gaze. When people are nervous, they're often more like this, right? Like their body doesn't really follow their gaze. It's more like a set of movements rather than everything being coherent and flowing fluidly together, right? So, if you remember earlier, we talked about how when you're stressed, the amygdala is like a security camera zooming into anything and everything. That is why our movements can often become quite tense instead of soft and flowy when we're in that state of stress and anxiety. Now, to counteract that hyper alert response, we can actually use this analogy of the security camera in a literal sense. Instead of focusing on one point and really zooming in and really narrowing on it, you can try to relax your vision, to zoom out a little bit, and then take a wide angle lens, like this panoramic view of everything. You can look slowly around you as well, side to side and top to bottom, and just having this soft, expanded gaze really helps to signal to your mind we're not under threat. It's like your security camera lens is almost unfocusing slightly so that you're looking through objects rather than fixating on all of the little tiny details of everything. I actually use this in something called the Mind Wide Open meditation at the start of my mindfulness programs. It's a neuroscience backed method leveraging the connection between your eyes and your autonomic nervous system to promote a sense of relaxation and ease in the body. So that's another tool, a short-term one that you can use in the moment when you're feeling super overwhelmed. And it's also very easy to learn as well. Okay, so say you've done both of these already, or you're experiencing mild real-time stress. It's there and you acknowledge it, but it's also not debilitating. You don't feel out of control and you don't feel unable to think. Say like a 5 out of 10 on a subjective units of distress scale rather than a 10 out of 10. We can now start to look at top-down approaches then, where you use logic or the mind to regulate stress and the body when we're on this 5 out of 10 scale. I'm going to give you a really simple question to use to relieve your short-term stress in the moment. I learned about this concept in cognitive behavioral therapy in my psychology degree, and this question might initially sound quite scary, but it's actually helped me so much in stressful situations as my go-to top-down approach strategy. And this question is, what is the worst that could happen? What is the worst that could happen? Now, this is especially useful if you're like me and you have a highly analytical and detail-oriented brain, because our brain jumps to intellectualize and analyze everything in the moment, causing you to panic. So by breaking down what truly is the worst realistic outcome, an emphasis on realistic, not unreasonable extreme possibilities, my warriors, this helps us to evaluate its likelihood, come up with a solid plan should that be the case, and then we can consider how we would respond to it if it did occur. What you may find is that after you break down the worst case scenario, you can then start to see that the reality is actually far less scary than your own anticipation of the event itself, or your own imagined extreme possibility. So when you're in those moments where you feel like you are functioning, but you do feel somewhat stressed, then you can ask yourself, what is the worst that could happen? We're going to move on to medium-term strategies now. And here I want to talk about reframing your relationship with stress to understand that stress is not inherently bad in itself. What do I mean by that? And why is it important? Well, in a 2013 study published in Health Psychology, researchers analyzed existing data of almost 29,000 adults in the US, which was linked to national death records, and they found that a key predictor of premature death was stress. The people who reported a lot of stress had a 43% higher risk of premature death. Stay with me, guys, for this, because a key thing is that within this group, and this is really important, within this group of 43% higher risk of premature death, these people had both stress and believed that stress had a big negative impact on their health. By contrast, the people who experienced the same high levels of stress but didn't see it as harmful actually lived for longer. Isn't that profound? Because this shows us that it isn't high stress alone that predicts worse health outcomes. It is the combination of having high stress but also believing that stress is harming you that predicts it. So this idea that our relationship to stress can impact the way stress affects us physically and mentally has also been backed up by the work of psychologist Dr. Alia Kroom at Stanford. She found that people who believe that stress is enhancing, meaning they saw stress as something that could make them stronger, more focused, or more resilient, actually showed different responses to stress. Their heart rate still went up, which is normal, but their blood vessels stayed open and they stayed relaxed. They also surprisingly performed better on focus, on memory, and on problem solving tasks, as well as recovering faster afterwards. By contrast, the stress is debilitating mindsets group viewed stress as a threat, as something that needed to be avoided at all costs. For this group, their blood vessels constricted, their cortisol levels spiked, and their performance reduced. They also had a higher likelihood of quitting or failing to reach the goals that they set themselves. Now, this isn't supposed to fearmonger, guys, but it's actually to empower us because it means that our mindset about stress, which we can control, is what plays a crucial role in how stress impacts us physically and emotionally. So your next question is probably, how do we move from a stress is debilitating mindset to a stress is enhancing mindset? I'm going to break this down for you guys. So first of all, understanding the mechanism of stress and why it exists alone can already help us in moving to a stress is enhancing mindset. That's why we got a little deeper into more of the scientific explanations today in the first part of this episode. When you do encounter phases of episodic stress, you can remind yourself of how stress works, that it is there to provide us energy, to help us increase our alertness and perform better. So instead of trying to get rid of it, we can start to see it as the source of energy. For example, before I deliver corporate sessions, I always encounter periods of stress myself. They say public speaking is the most common universal fear, second to death. And I never know the new faces I'm going to be seeing in the class that day. And sometimes directors are just going to stare at you blankly for the full hour, especially if you're delivering a keynote speech rather than a workshop. Now, they don't say anything to you the whole time. They literally just stare into you until the end of the session. And that can be really scary. I find it very unnerving. There's a lot of uncertainty around it. Before I step into the room, I often think to myself, oh no, they're all gonna judge me straight away. They're going to think I look 15, which I know, guys, I kind of do. What if they think that this high schooler, what is she doing here, you know? Or what if they think the session might not land well? And what if the people are just not in the right mental state to meditate? Because sometimes that can happen, especially in the middle of the day when, I don't know, maybe your organization has just thrown in this meditation session for you when you have the biggest meeting of your life in the next 20, 30 minutes, right? Sometimes people are not in the right state to meditate, and that's okay. Or maybe sometimes people are not in the right life stage to be practicing mindfulness either. I don't think there's a specific stage of life where only when you're in that stage of life can you practice mindfulness. But I do think that this work is something that definitely meets you where you're at. If you feel ready to pursue it, then it will meet you in ways that you've never imagined, giving you emotional intelligence, resilience, confidence, joy, peace. But if you're not ready to approach these concepts, then no matter how much someone forces you into it, you still have that resistance and that blockage inside you, right? This is why I never hard sell any of these things. I strongly believe it will meet you when you're ready. But when I don't know who's going to be in these workshops, I don't know how ready they feel. It's a bit different from one-to-one work where we've already done the intake. Then I will start spiraling. I will start thinking, are they ready for this work? Is it going to land for them? But then I remember that this stress is here to help me, not to harm me. I know that with the way stress works, it heightens my awareness. And the science behind stress makes me more focused on things, which means that I can actually be more intuitive and read the energy better when I'm delivering the meditation. I know that the way stress works means that my vision will also probably be more narrow. So it helps me to be extra conscious that I widen and soften my gaze so that I look at every single person in the room, side to side, top and bottom, everywhere, all around me, not just focus on the table that's in front of me. So that is an example of how you can reframe it. It's kind of like the 5 4 3 2 1 rule that Mel Robbins talks about before going on stage. So for those of you who don't know this, it's basically once she catches her nerves of going into a room or speaking on stage, she counts down from 5. She goes 5 4 3 2 1, and then she shifts to I'm excited. I'm really excited for this. So it's basically this pattern interrupts in the brain where when you're starting to spiral, you stop it in its tracks and then you turn the emotion of having these nerves around you into this feeling of excitement. This is why I mentioned earlier, guys, to watch How to Actually Feel Your Emotions, the previous episode before this one, because we talk about how emotions are your initial physical responses to something, and then your feelings are your interpretation of that physical response. So in this example, your physical sensation of before going on stage would be the heart beating, and then your feeling that you attribute to it can either be nervous, scared, worried, or excited. So you can actually directly train your brain to interpret this nervousness as excitement. Reframing your relationship with stress is what I call a medium term strategy because this requires neuroplasticity, which basically means it requires new learning, which takes time. But understanding stress is already 50% of it, and then the rest is just, with time, rewiring your direct responses to it. So, thinking about your own relationship to stress now, how do you think you view stress? If you view it negatively, how can you move from a stress is debilitating mindset to a stress is enhancing mindset using the tools we have just discussed so far? A couple of things to think about there. So I'm going to give you another medium-term strategy in the meantime, which is to learn how to prioritize and organize. Stress thrives on uncertainty. So to de-stress, it's important that we deal with the root cause of the issue, focusing on what's within your control, and then creating baby steps to tackle them. The way to do this is by writing down everything you're thinking. And then once you've basically mentally unjumbled your thoughts onto paper, you can then start to create a to-do list of your tasks moving forward. And once you've created this to-do list, you can then reorder them according to what's priority so that you have a rough timeline of how long it might take to achieve these things. I talk about this process in the mini sip episode, Design an Evening Ritual for Rest and Reset. So you can also listen to that as well after this if you wish to find a way to help you de-stress through journaling and writing everything down. The main point I want to make when talking about this medium-term strategy is that stress thrives on uncertainty. So having a direction and a clear plan gives us confidence, which then makes us feel more in control of the situation. My personal motto is if I can't control this problem in the next 24 hours, then I will reorient my attention to something else, focusing on self-care so that after those 24 hours, I will be in a better position to deal with what's stressing me. Let's move on to our last section of today. Long-term strategies to manage chronic stress and regulate our nervous system over time. Now, this really is about lifestyle factors now. We're looking at the macro overall picture. The first thing you want to do with this is look at getting the basics right. A lot of the times when we're stressed, we think of it as being related to one situation only. But we don't realize that our response to that situation is actually a buildup of a lot of different things going on behind the scenes. And that one situation triggering our response is actually just the tip of the iceberg, the last straw. So if you notice that you had a disproportionate response to something that probably wouldn't have triggered you in that way normally, then you can start to have a look at what you have been doing in your day-to-day life leading up to that. Are you sleeping enough? Are you eating enough? Are you drinking enough? Are you moving your body regularly? Do you have connection or community? Sometimes the most obvious answer is actually going back to the basics. The basic needs of sleep, nutrition, exercise, and connection are all actually some of the most powerful factors contributing to our overall well-being. In our mindfulness programs, we actually dedicate one whole week to examining our existing self-care, identifying our sustaining and draining habits. Having someone there to support your journey, someone to share what changes you have noticed each week, also helps to provide that connection need. Someone who encourages you on your journey, helping you to see things that you might not see, and giving you a sense of accountability through meeting week by week. Now, of course, this doesn't have to be through the mindfulness programs with me. It could be with someone completely different. You can even just find that in community, a group where you regularly meet to share about different things that have happened for you, or maybe working towards a goal and sharing what you've observed leading up to that goal. When I went through my own self-care week in my mindfulness training, I realized that I wanted to move my body more as someone who previously was a massive homebody. I move my body at least twice a week now, most times four, but I also track each time I do it as well as how I feel after I've done it. And I can't imagine not having movement in my life now because I notice such a big difference in my body, even just through 1 week of not exercising. Like the mental symptoms I get from it, my moods, everything. I don't feel as alive and awake and energized. So the same can be done for every aspect of our lives, right? We don't have to think mindfully about only exercising. We can track our sleep times as well, or we can also notice how we feel when we try eating mindfully or trying something different in a way that we don't normally carry it out. So for example, one of my clients told me how she thought sleeping for 7 hours was her normal baseline for enough rest. But then she started tracking this after our self-care session together, and she realized that she actually needed 9. And she never knew she needed this until she just experimented one day. And she said, wow, So this is how people are supposed to feel. No wonder people talk about feeling so good after a good night's rest or good night's sleep. I always thought what I got was sufficient for me to not feel groggy. But then when I tried 9 hours, I literally felt like a completely different person. And now I can't go back to only 7 hours of sleep. So basically, having a look at what you're doing in your existing life, whether this is sleep, whether this is exercise, whether this is nutrition, or whatever other aspects are big in your life, you can start to notice where you feel better, which weeks you feel better, and also the actions contributing to it, the lifestyle factors contributing to it. Speaking of lifestyle factors, having a regular routine is also another strategy. A meta-analysis published in BMC Medicine analyzed data from over 900,000 participants, and it found that disrupted daily routines were associated with higher symptoms of depression, anxiety, and general psychological distress. This makes a lot of sense because routine creates for us a sense of rhythm, a sense of control, and predictability, so our bodies know when to rest and when to work. It also minimizes our daily decisions, reserving your mental resources for bigger things and providing unnecessary strain to it. We already deal with millions of decisions a day, from what food to buy for lunch, from which bus to take, to what outfit to buy for that dinner tonight, to if we even want to go to that dinner tonight. And this is why a lot of high functioning individuals, athletes, or business owners often have a team to manage their nutrition, which is often certain meals on rotation, or they might have non negotiable sleep times so that they have more cognitive resources to deal with the bigger decisions. So, having this regular routine helps you to compartmentalize as well and set your body rhythm to know when to do what. The last long term strategy I'm going to give you today is to make your own emotional toolbox, understanding your own go to top down and bottom up approaches. You can do this by building your own self awareness over time through mindfulness, observing in what instances are you in a heightened state of fight or flight, or how you might reframe your relationship to them, and also in what situations do top down or bottom up approaches work better for you. Ideally, you want to incorporate a combination of both of these in your toolbox. A top-down one so that I can help you to make sense of or challenge your stressful thoughts, and then a bottom-up one to help you release excess energy stored in the body through somatic work. Somatic work is where you tap into your body instead to release your emotion. Things like shaking your body when you feel a certain emotion like anxiety or fear. I do that as well sometimes. If I feel so much emotion trapped in my body, I'll literally just shake it out. So that's a bottom up somatic work approach. The key is really in knowing which tool is good for which scenarios so that you can not only feel confident managing stress no matter what form it shows up in, but also prevent it from occurring too regularly and then put in the strategies to mitigate your response to it when it does show up. Alright, guys, that's all I have for you today. I hope this gave you some encouragement or some new tools learned that you can start using to help manage your stress today. To summarize, we talked about how to understand the different types of stress: acute, episodic acute stress, and chronic stress. We also looked at strategies to manage them. In the short term, that is deep belly breaths, softening the gaze, and asking yourself, what is the worst that could happen? Then in the medium term, reframing your relationship with stress by moving from a stress is debilitating mindset to a stress is enhancing mindset, and also learning the skills of prioritizing and organizing. Finally, in the long term, it's about getting our basics right, building in routine, and eventually building our own emotional toolbox over time. Thank you for being here with me today, guys. And if you learned anything new today, let me know in the comments below or send it to someone who you know might need this episode. If you took any value from this episode, I would be so grateful if you could do me a favor and take a moment to subscribe and rate the show so more people can benefit from mindfulness. Until next time, keep steeping in wisdom and don't forget to take a moment for yourself today, even if it's just 5 minutes.